Welcome to Blackstone Book Talks, a podcast featuring exclusive interviews from Blackstone's bookish network of authors, narrators, and special guests.
Hello, and welcome to the Open Road of Forging One's Identity, our latest Blackstone Book Talks panel. My name is Bella Bedoya, and I'm thrilled to introduce two authors whose recent releases have been shaking up the literary fiction community, Misha Lazzara and Alex Temblador. Praised by Publishers Weekly as a notable debut that readers will enjoy, Misha is a professor, poet, parent, and podcast host of Bandwives Pod. Exploring themes of trauma, self-righteousness, and coming-of-age idealism, her debut novel, MANMADE Constellations, officially entered the world this week on August 9th. Teaching both creative and freelance writing, Alex is the award-winning author of Secrets of the Casa Rosada and the recently released HALF OUTLAW, her debut release in literary fiction. Exploring themes of mixed identity and the meaning of family, HALF OUTLAW has been named in the top pick by IO9, Gizmodo, LitHub, Crime Brief, and more since its July 12th launch. Welcome, Misha and Alex. I'm so glad to have you guys here. And first off, Misha, congratulations on this week's launch and your book tour. Congratulations to you, Alex, on your 1-month book birthday anniversary. It's such an exciting time to have you guys both here and bringing in all these celebrations. And it's just been such a pleasure to work with you both. I'm such a huge fan of how you connect with your readers and the way that you share sensitivity with identity, and coming of age and just understanding who oneself is through literature and just through how you operate as an educator and also as an author. This panel is called The Open Road of Forging One's Identity. So my first question to you is, what does forging one's identity mean to you?
We all have to forge our identity at one time or another. And when I'm developing characters, I'm kind of pulling parts of me and what I am going through in terms of my identity at the time. So in terms of HALF OUTLAW, my main character is mixed. She is trying to discover, who she is separate from her family, and even not separate from her family, even when she's beyond them, they're still a part of her. And, both me and Misha take our characters on the road to have them discover their identity. I can't remember who it is, but they said you either go home in a book or a story or you hit the road. And both of our characters, our main characters, Misha has two, definitely hit the road to discover what their identity is. And as a travel writer myself, I know that traveling, being in places that you're not grounded in, you're crossing time zones and spaces that you do not usually interact with, it can do a lot to yourself. It can help you see who you are. It can help you reconsider your identity, what it means to you, what your past and your present and your future can be. So I think there's beauty in travel. I love it, but I also love what it can do for us and how we see ourselves and who we want to be. So that's, to me, forging one's identity. How about you, Misha?
Yeah, I think I totally agree with what you said about you hit the open road and you have all these new experiences and you're taken out of your comfort zone, and it makes you, these kind of images, then they're reflecting off you, they're bouncing through you, they're troubling you, they're tiring you out, which happens in my novel, which I feel like when you're at that, like, you've been passing through time zones, you haven't been sleeping, she definitely, Rocky was like up late, driving all night. She was sore, her body was tired. And with Lo and John, they're just, kind of like being irresponsible as far as like whatever that means, but just not getting enough sleep. And so I think that is like happens with travel for sure. I know a lot of times you're like, you go on a trip and you get home and you're like, I need 2 more days to just sleep, to catch up. Anyway, I think like all of that affects us in a way that makes us like kind of reconsider our place in the world, reconsider who we are, where we want to be, if we're happy when we get home, if we're happier when we're on the road, all these kinds of questions. And I think in the end, for all of our characters, what happened with Lo and Jason, and I noticed with Rocky too, was that you come to the place where you're like, I inside of me is where I make these decisions, like inside, and they're saying, they're taking a look inward after they travel all those places outward. They really turn inward and reflect, and I think that's one of the only ways you can really change or grow in your identity, and that's through like integrating those experiences that take you out of your comfort zone and really make you look at the world differently.
Yeah, I like what you said, like you have to get out of your comfort zone, because I think with our characters, they definitely start out in the book in comfort zones. Like I'm happy with who I am and how I am at that moment. So like, for instance, I was very curious about Lo because she is a freegan. I think that's, yeah, she lives a freegan life. She's anti-capitalist, and she is very comfortable in that. Like, where did that idea come from? Like, do you have connections to freegan life? Did you grow up with it or have any relation to it? I'm very curious about how you developed Lo in that, being that her comfort zone.
Yeah, I'm interested in you know, this is going to sound ridiculous, but like more from a theory, from an academic standpoint, because in school we read a lot, you know, about like class and Marxism and waste for sure. And I took a class at UNC Charlotte, kind of all about like waste and colonialism and, you know, and those kinds of things. And so I think about it a lot, but it really truthfully stemmed from myself in my 20s of being vegan. And kudos to whatever anyone's beliefs are, whatever their, you know, but I realized coming out of that phase or experience in my life, how self-righteous people can be, myself included, and kind of whether that self-righteousness does any good or does more harm than good. And that was kind of the basis for that, like processing those experiences and those beliefs. And I think any belief that is taken to the extreme at all, and that's kind of why I wanted to play with this freeganism, because to me it's obviously good inherently, the idea of not wasting and taking what's been thrown out, but she uses it in a way that I've said before a lot in like quite when people ask questions, she uses it as like a shield and a weapon. And so I think that, and actually that can segue to my question for you, because Rocky uses her personality, I would say, as a shield, maybe to keep her safe, to keep her from being vulnerable. And I guess I'm just curious, like in what ways it, you know, how she broke that down, whether it's through, you know, like through meeting her grandfather, surely, and I don't want to give away your answer, but even like earlier on, you know, with Bethy, with Jackson, I don't want to give spoilers away. So I don't know if you have some thoughts.
Yeah, I think she comes in here, like she starts out the book, she's very hardened person. She has been hurt. There's no doubt, like her childhood was not great. Growing up among these outlaw motorcycle club members, her uncle is a drug addict, abusive in many different ways. So yeah, of course you're going to be hardened. And once you've separated yourself, you're like, okay, I'm good. I think I wrote a symbol in the book where she creates this brick tower around her to keep the pain out, to keep people, you know, a hand distance away, which I recently told someone that's what I did as a kid myself. So I liked putting that in there. But, you know, going on the road, like going back to that, yeah, like you said, when you're tired and you haven't seen people in a long time, and you're seeing them 13 years later, they've changed, you've changed, but also you notice how you change, you know, you revert back to your childhood and the ways you acted around them when you were a kid, once you're in this environment again. And so that whole thing kind of, I think, shook Rocky and makes her look at the people in her life and say, okay, yes, I'm going on this ride. Dodge was clearly a little different than I like to remember him. You know, he did all these bad things, but yeah, he's had some changes since I've been gone. And a lot of the people have changed, and maybe I didn't behave the right way when I was around them. So I think putting Rocky in a different situation that was not her safe space, she couldn't have any control there, because once you have no control, you have to, you know, readjust and decide, am I going to change or am I going to not? Yeah, that was a good question. Thank you.
No, yeah, and that's interesting, because then I think about in her relationship with Trevor, which was a really interesting relationship, because she was not ever at the beginning willing to change. Like she didn't want to. And I think that that's something that Lo learns too, because it's like, if you want to be in a partnership, if you want to be in a relationship, Like, are you willing to? And if you're not, it's like she learned it wasn't like a symbiotic in any way.
Yeah, well, like I loved watching Lo and John's like relationship develop over the time. And actually John is the one that challenges Lo in a, and I think other people might have, it seemed like the people in the town were very welcoming to her ideas and trying to connect with her in that. You know, her ex definitely didn't communicate his feelings of how she made him feel. But John is like, you know, no, this isn't right. And he's kind of able to pull his own experience in terms of like the self-righteousness of religion. I thought, you know, it was kind of interesting. You were comparing, and not comparing, but we had like very like this religious group that John grew up in. I think a snake church, right?
Mhm.
And it was very like strict and conservative, and his family had these self-righteous values. So I liked, how did you play with that? You know, how was that process to show, I think, some similarities between freeganism, anti-capitalism, and, you know, this very strict religious way of life?
Exactly. Yes, that's exactly. I think it was like my hope to be like, all extremes are extreme. No, you know, all extremes are going to be extreme. And they, in many ways, like even Lo potentially being like hyper liberal, you know, and which, you know, and like I said, everything's fine. And I tried in the book too to show as many as I could, because I do believe that the world is so multifaceted. And like Deb was doing this work that was, you know, truly good, you know, I think in finance that Lo could wrap her head around. And while, you know, while like there's also this like true problem with capitalism, you know, and so in the same way, it's like, well, there's this true problem with self-righteousness too. Mm-hmm. And so it's like, it can permeate anywhere. It can permeate into anyone's life. And so I do think I was trying to show, and then at the same way, like Raul crossed himself, right? So he's religious. You can be religious and not be in a snake church, or you know, you can be religious and not, you know, and not be contributing to that like kind of judgmental self-righteousness that is inherent in some people, inherent in probably because we live in the societies that we do, that value status, or, you know, or value piety or whatever it is. And so we can get carried away in using those as our identity, which I don't necessarily personally believe from my characters can take you to your inner core. I feel like those are maybe in the book, they're like boxes that you can fit into. And I think Lo's identities were that. They were ways for her to just like be like, this is who I am, this is what I do. And I think, like you mentioned, that the people in town were nice to her. Yeah, she was projecting constantly. She was projecting her own probably doubts, because she was truly living the lifestyle in some ways, but also using her connections and her father's money in other ways, you know. And so for whatever reason, she didn't feel welcome, probably for deeper reasons than just her beliefs. But
absolutely. And I want to get into that, but we did get a question from Jessica for both of us. She asked, I was wondering if it was a conscious choice to reflect any part of your personal identity in both of your books as protagonists. Are you anything like Lo?
Yeah, I think John, I'm like all my characters. Yeah, I read about this before, and I think you can only, I mean, if you didn't know any part of this identity, would you be able to write it? I don't know. I don't think so. And so Lo, it's definitely like I was processing that kind of self-righteous identity. And with John, I grew up very religious, and I think I was kind of processing that too. And with Jason, you know, the surprise pregnancy, the trauma, that, you know, these kinds of things. And so I think you're like always patchworking a little bit of your life, but then at the end, and you might agree or disagree, I feel like the world just takes over and becomes its own thing. So what about you and Rocky?
Yeah, it's funny. Both of my best friends, they read the book and they were like, that's Alex. Alex said that. Alex has done that. Rocky is definitely my early 20s. And it's funny that you were talking about self-righteousness, because I was very much like that. And it was more about like justice based, like this is right, this is wrong. Like there's no gray space. And I think Rocky, it's funny, she's a lawyer, but for her to like kind of survive in a very violent, racist, extreme type of community, like the lawless were, she had to kind of separate, like, here's what's good, here's what's bad. I need to know those differences because I can't live in the gray. I can't do that. And, you know, she's been able to do that for a while as a lawyer, but of course this book kind of ruins all that. But I was definitely, yeah, I write an aspect of myself or whatever I'm working through at the time in any character that I have. So if you're reading it now, I hope I'm not like that anymore. But, you know, there's elements of hard, and the way that Rocky is hard, I was definitely like that. The way, you know, keeping people at bay and difficulty with relationships, I've had that too. So yeah, I hope that readers like that, like feel like they can kind of connect with us in that way, which is kind of cool.
Yeah, it's interesting. You talk about like how it's yourself in this tower, right? That you had also kind of used, and I loved that at the end, and I don't know if we're supposed to give stuff away or not, but I love that she saw the house, you know, and was like, oh my gosh, that was cool. And so I was interested in how you were writing those sections of childhood and through like the narrative of present. And it certainly felt to me that you wrote them in order. So like you wrote the 90 section, yeah, and then because if they fit so well, but I was curious if that was true or if you had already written the age.
Yeah, what's funny is my first book, I tried to do that. So Half Outlaw is past chapters in our childhood, different ages, and then the present storyline, which is this road trip across the US, basically for her uncle's funeral ride. It's called Grieving Ride in the book. It didn't work on the first book. Like I had to throw out like half the chapters and just set it in a present time. In this book, I was really excited to delve into that because I think that who we are now is very much informed on our past. It is breaking down our childhood trauma, working through it, seeing, you know, the complexities of the adults in our life and seeing them as adults at the time. Yeah, they were supposed to take care of you, but they were also like human, bringing in their trauma, and they didn't deal with it, and that's going to affect you. So I really wanted to explore that aspect. But yeah, I did write it in order. Some chapters, it wasn't necessarily at the beginning. It was like I would write one in the past, one in the present, maybe two more in the present, one in the past. Like it was kind of at this point during the editing phase, it's pretty much past, present, past, present. There was one section at the very end that's present in two parts. But I always wanted to connect, even some of the words at the end of the chapters connects to the next chapter.
Yeah.
Or like chapters ahead. Which, you know, it's funny, there's so many crossovers between Half Outlaw and MANMADE Constellations. You don't have the time play per se, but you have these different perspectives. You have Jason's perspective in half of the book, you have Lo's perspective in the other half of the book, and then in between it, you have objective scientific facts, which was a really cool structure. Who came to you first? Was it Lo? Was it Jason? Did you always know you wanted to have both of these characters whose lives intersect, but they're very different people?
It was crazy because I started writing this a long time ago. I did start writing it in my 20s and I couldn't have finished it then. Wouldn't have been this, that's for sure. And I'm glad it's this. But it was funny because I started with John Blank, the name, and I was like, the Southern guy in Minnesota, what's he doing there? You know, and then it was in my first like conception, they were already together and it was fraught because of their differences. And then I knew I wanted them to go on a road trip, and somehow Blanche came into it. But I thought that initially, like, it would be Jason, John, and Lo in like a love triangle. But then Jason just came out swinging, and he was not into that bullshit. I know we're not supposed to necessarily curse, but she said it was okay.
There's so much cussing in my book, at least.
So yeah, he's just not. I just felt like no way, he's not going to get involved in that, even with everything that he's going through and all the chaos. So and then there's a point in the book where they were supposed to come together earlier potentially, and as I was writing, I was like, no, Lo doesn't deserve to run into him. He's got too much going on. He's like on his own trip essentially, and so but it came together in a way that Jason was going to be very, very short chapters, just like kind of cat and mouse following him around, but we needed more of his story. And I really liked Alexis and her the agriculture thing is also really important to me, and so I felt like their story deserved a little more.
Yeah, no, I think when they do get together, my favorite scenes at the end, you have created these people who are so complicated, and they both can't get out of their way sometimes.
Yeah.
Like they're getting there, but they still can't get out of their way sometimes, which I think is both related to their childhood trauma, like 100%.
And the older I get, the more I think, I mean, like, proud of Rocky for doing what she had to do, because the older I get, the more I think like people cannot get out of their own way. Like, how many people sabotage what they want because they don't think they deserve it, because of trauma, because of personality, whatever, imperfections or whatever. And so I definitely have high hopes for both of them, but I leave them kind of in the reader's hands. Like, who knows what will, and same with Rocky. We know that she got her grandfather, which is amazing, but I hope that's not a huge spoiler, but
No, yeah.
Oh, we got another question though, and this one is from John. It says, I think both of your titles are so interesting. What separates half from full outlaw? What separates half from full outlaw, and where does the line get drawn? And
Okay, and then I'll answer, and then how do we make our own on Constellations is for you. So yeah, my uncle called me a half outlaw because he said, I'm an outlaw, so that makes you half outlaw. And I thought that was so interesting because, yeah, what does make somebody half outlaw? Like, you either do not follow the laws of the country, which would make you an outlaw. So how do you do it halfway? Like, are you sticking your toe in, sticking it out? Like, but I think we all kind of do that. I don't think there is a way, like I said earlier, to be black or white. There's gray. And you can always rebel. You can always kind of be a little badassery. You might do things that are technically against the law. I mean, we all do it. We all speed. I mean, well, let's, admit that, or we don't, we jaywalk or whatever it may be. But I think for Rocky, it was like really delving into, she had pushed away the whole outlaw lifestyle as soon as she left them. She learns by the end of the book, they are part of me. I can't get away from the rebelliousness, the violence, the trauma that they are. And, the kind of independence that they hit on the road. I think outlaw motorcycle clubs, live in a whole different world that is rough and gritty. And she starts to accept, like, that's where I come from. That's part of who I am. And I can try to be as good as I can be, but that it's only to a certain point, because people are part of me. And she has a tattoo that's half outlaw on her arm, and it's kind of a reminder that there's outlaw in her, that's never going to leave. So yeah, I don't know. I hope that's a good answer, but I love the concept of trying to figure out what makes you half outlaw. So yeah. And how about you, Misha? How do we make our own constellations?
Well, in the book, you take those little tiny plastic stars that glow in the dark and you put
them on the wall.
But I think, and initially this is funny because someone asked me this at my event, my publication event, and the title initially, like, I love my title. Alenka did such a great job, or the cover. I mean, sorry, not the title. The title's fine.
Gorgeous.
The cover is amazing. Yeah, I love it. And I was thinking, like, is it fireflies in a jar? But to me, that like really recalls like a southern like a southern novel. I don't know, like a sweet southern novel, which I don't think my book fits into either of those categories. And so I think both of those were like kind of the visual behind it, like fireflies in a jar and the plastic stars on the wall. But I think more than that, it was like the idea also of, like, when they stop in West Texas, there's a scene with John and Lo, and they stop at like an abandoned gas station, and they see these refinery lights that are beautiful. They're beautiful from a distance. And she's kind of troubled by the fact that she's called to them, like some kind of like siren call, or you can't look away, because we've mimicked that. We've mimicked the stars in this oil refinery, that had this big fire, which is a true story. And so I don't know, I guess it was kind of like that reflection of like the stars down, and that was the opening quote that kind of mentioned that too. But it's funny also, I don't know how much this connects, but my sister-in-law was talking about it, and she's like, well, they're called man-made. It's not human-made. It's not woman-made. You know, I don't know if she's like giving me crap for it or something. And she was like, but so are the structures that Lois, some of, you know, many of the structures that Lois fighting against, like the you know, hyper-capitalism and the patriarchy, you know, all these things that she's struggling against. And Rocky was, I mean, especially in the 90s and back then, struggling with and the racism and the sexism and the, oh my gosh, I couldn't, speaking of that, I couldn't get over the sheeps and the mamas. I was like, oh my God.
That's what they're called in the communities. It's insane. And reading the accounts of sheeps and mamas is pretty wild too. Ugh.
So tell me about that. Tell me about the research, because I know you said like, thank you. You think I read your acknowledgments, thanks a bunch of people like for that insight, but maybe more like about the research you did to write about the biker gang.
Yeah, so I didn't grow up in a biker gang. My parents are postal workers. Everybody in my family is a postal worker.
Well, yeah.
But the uncle who called me half outlaw, he is a motorcycle guy. He's very gritty, edgy, was in the Vietnam War, which you can kind of see connections to Dodge in that. He was never part of an outlaw motorcycle club, but he had associations with them. And I remember going to bars when we were younger. There was a drive-in bar in my hometown, which actually Rocky goes to. There was 2 of them, and we would go to those and you would see the bikers there. I've been to places where they're around. I have talked to people who's, you know, in clubs, not the violent drug dealing, gun dealing ones, but being able to get kind of that feedback. I also read a lot of books in which people who were in those groups, you know, came out of it, or there were police officers that were undercover. So I read one about like I don't know if she was the only woman, but she's the only woman who's told her story that was FBI that went undercover, and like being basically a sheep, which is kind of like you're part of the club in that you are moved around for sex, pleasure, in whatever way it is. And reading her book, and I wish I knew the name of it right now. It was just mind blowing. I also got lucky that, you know, my agent has connections to motorcycle club groups. A beta reader grew up in motorcycles, knows people, so she gave me a lot of feedback. But you know, especially listening to a podcast from somebody who grew up in one was really good. Like you said, all of our structures are built by men. So even if I wasn't involved in it, it's not like a hard leap to understand how these communities who are closed off and create their own like societal structures, hierarchies, not religion, but in a way like traditions.
I was thinking that.
Yeah. You know, there are people that's going to be in that structure that are going to be seen as weaker, taken advantage of, and whether that's women or children, you know, it happens. So it wasn't too far off to kind of go through the logical steps of what Rocky might have gone through. I could have made it worse, to be honest. I'm sure it's been worse for some women. But yeah, I guess I do have some pretty hard scenes in the book where you do see how bad it can get.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, just the names for me, I was like, oh God, I don't know how I got. So that was enough. But now, you know, my present day sense, modern, you know, I know the 90s were lawless. Even more, you know, than maybe some other times, because of the cocaine, because of the drugs that were still like really, I mean, they're still coming through now, but that were really coming through then kind of lawlessly. And the life.
I was, you know, we were talking about travel earlier. You were talking about in West Texas, which I live in Texas. So when you said the West Texas refinery, I was kind of thinking Marfa and the Marfa lights and stuff. Anyways, you had all these places where they stop. Joshua Tree, is it Albuquerque?
Mm-hmm.
Albuquerque, Montana, like, and they go to California. Had you been to all these places? Were they important to you in some way? Why did you want to showcase, you know, the route that they ended up taking?
Yeah, my husband tours, or he's in a band and he tours for a living, and we've been together for over 14 years, and so I've been to every state and every place on the stop, you know. And my dad's a school teacher, so actually before I even met my husband, I'd been like counting, and I've been to like 35 states, because in the summers we were going like week-long road trips because he didn't teach in the summers. And
Mhm.
so I had done a lot of road tripping and touring in my life, and so I definitely love looking out the window, and just describing the views and taking the views. My little brother lives in Albuquerque, and so I had like real feet on the ground, so to speak, like getting real details, and I love it up there. Well, it's over there, and
Yeah.
so yeah, I think it was just kind of places that I've stopped that I remembered. For the Santa Rosa, it was like kind of the wheat farm prime time, area. And so I was thinking like, and I went there, I like went there into like fancy lady stuff, and like I ate seafood
Yeah.
and stuff. So I did not do what they were doing. I didn't dumpster dive or any of that. But I think that I wanted to be able to describe the places that I as well as I could. And I still don't know if I did. Like when the last time I went to Idaho, well, I went to Boise not that long ago, but a lot of those places were when I was a kid, so the
Yeah.
accent helps, obviously. And I wonder that about you too. I didn't know, I don't know if I knew you lived in Texas now. So there's a lot of that. But same with the road trip. Did you do that trip? Did you internet?
Yeah. So the book starts off in Escondido, Los Angeles. Rocky lives in LA. She grew up in Escondido, California. I lived in LA for a year. I have family that's from there. And when I moved back to Texas, I take basically the route she takes to get to my hometown, which is Wichita Falls. It's in the book. It's the very last stop of the book. So that was fun to like showcase my hometown because it gets no love and nobody knows of it except to drive through it to go to Colorado. When I went home and did a launch party, I read a section of Wichita Falls and everybody felt so good because they just don't see it themselves in media. But yeah, I've been to Albuquerque. There's a stop in my book in Albuquerque too. I loved it. And actually I include a character who is part of the Santa Ana Pueblo, which I have visited. Arizona, I kind of make it a mythical town that's not really there because I didn't want to go into a big city in that scene. And then I used to live in Oklahoma, which they stop in OKC. Where she stops in, I used to live blocks from. They stop in an Asian district. And I used to live blocks from there. So it was cool to like highlight this aspect of Oklahoma that I don't know if people know about. They go a little bit into Arkansas. I haven't really been into Arkansas, but most of the places, is from my life for sure.
Yeah, Elysian is a real town. I did not do it. I didn't describe it right. I mixed other small towns. So I hope no, like one of the real 800 residents are like, no, this is wrong.
So you grew up in a bigger town in Montana? I mean, sorry, not Montana.
Minnesota. People do it all the time. People are like, that's somewhere over there, which is part of the reason I write I'm writing book 2 and it takes place in like South Dakota and I have family from there. And so I feel like those, quote unquote flyover states are definitely where my heart lies. And so, yeah, Elysian is a real town of about 800 people. It's beautiful though. I mean, it's way beautiful, more beautiful than Lowe gives it credit for. It is pocketed in between 3 lakes, which most towns in Minnesota are, which is lucky. Yeah. But I, like you, like it's also mythical. It's not like the real place. It's the place that she projects, she sees it for, and John sees it very differently, and Jason sees it differently, and everyone sees it differently, which is, I think, reality anyway.
So. Yeah. I wanted to ask you, I think I mentioned earlier, you had these objective scientific facts. So you had these little sections that are seemingly pulled from this Firefly book that Lowe is reading. I think I read in your acknowledgements, there was some connection, like you've read that book. There's a book that you really love. Why do you think that Lowe connects so much to the Fireflies and this becomes like a big part of her story?
Honestly, I think for one, the main reason is because like at this part of her life, that's the book she's reading. And I think that that's just what happens. Like I remember going through Yellowstone with my dad on a road trip because I remember the trip so well because I was finishing Lord of the Rings. And it's like I do feel like it's just the book she found. And she's that kind of person who would be like, this is so cool. It's so interesting. She gives herself her own education, and so she's learning and she likes to learn. And I think that in Minnesota and in a lot of places, fireflies are a big deal, especially when you're like kind of on the cusp of childhood, but she's obviously a little older than that, but she's kind of really outgrowing it, or hopefully learning to outgrow it. And so I think it just fit in with the like idea of like spring coming too, which it does at the end of the book, and summer following. But really, I think it was just like I don't remember how it first came to be. It might have first came to be like she had the book and then thought about them, but I just like the idea of having their own space, because I do feel like the books that we're reading at certain times can really help us understand the world. And I think through those objectives, she's like learning about the world and herself in those small little sections. Maybe I don't know what that was. You write and then you're like, who knows? I don't know. It just comes.
Yeah.
But
I liked it as a structure because I was like, ooh, might have to do something like that one day. It was cool to see the breakups. Yeah.
Yeah, I read it's called Karl's Book by a Danish poet, and it was like part memoir, part poetry. And she uses these crazy structures, and then you read a book and you're just like, wow, this is cool. It's very, very postmodern, I guess, or, kind of just like breaking it up. And that's part of the reason I was like, thought about giving Jerry and John their own short chapters, their own narrative. So everyone's like, we're at the point in life and human evolution where like people are getting their own version of the story because of the internet. So I was kind of playing with that too. Everyone, and even the fireflies, get their own voice.
Yeah, get their own thing.
Yeah, but I mean, speaking of like the books and stuff that we're reading and what we're into, what about you? Are there books that did help guide the writing of Half Outlaw, or just kind of what you're drawing inspiration from?
Yeah, I mean, Half Outlaw is magical realism, so I read a ton of magical realism. I think I've said in other podcasts, and I'll keep saying it because I love her so much. Ana Castillo's So Far From God was the point in my life where I was like, yep, this is what I've been trying to write. Didn't know it was just genre. Didn't know how to do it. Here is like the most beautiful thing I could write. And I love that book. It launched me into other magical realism stories. But yeah, I read Rachel Kushner's The Flamethrowers. Mm-hmm. I had already had this idea to write this motorcycle story, and my professor, because I was in my MFA program at the time, she said, oh, you have to read this book. It's amazing. It's motorcycles. You'll love it. It's set in the 70s, I think. My book's from 1963 to 1990. And I read it. It is one of my favorite books still. I think it's a beautiful coming of age story. It's not outlaw motorcycle clubs, but it is a woman who rides. It's a woman who's dealing with like the sexism, in riding motorcycles, and in a love story, which was kind of cool. So that book was very informative. And then I read Bryn Greenwood's oh God, why am I blanking? All the Ugly and Wonderful Things. And it actually has a motorcycle club in there. And it has a woman who's the main character or girl/woman, I guess she changes throughout the book. But it was so uncomfortable to read that book, and in the best way, that I was like, yeah, that's what I'm trying to do with Half Outlaw. I know you read it, there's cussing, there's violence, there's sexism, there's abuse, there's all the bad things. And I've had people who say it's very hard to read. I don't like seeing 4-year-old Rocky getting neglected and abused and stuff. But people deal with that every day. I dealt with some of the stuff. It wasn't comfortable for me to deal with it.
Yeah.
But writing a story in which you can see the complexity of these experiences, how they impact people, how the things you don't even know you're saying will impact people. I hope readers get something out of it, even if it just sits with them for a while and comes out unconsciously one day. Yeah, so that was like a very roundabout way of answering that question.
No, it wasn't. It was really interesting. I need to remember the Ana Castillo, what's it called again?
So Far From God.
So Far From God. I'm gonna try to remember that.
Yeah, it's actually set in New Mexico, so
that's cool.
Yeah, it's very good.
Yeah, I loved the elements of magical realism. We haven't even talked about it. Yeah, that was so cool. I just felt like it tied things together so well, and I felt like it lightened things up in a way that was like maybe needed, like the balance of like bringing in the magic. And you mentioned the Women Who Run with Wolves, which I love, and I love her that book, and I've listened to 2 of her like audios. You know, she does the speeches or gives the talks.
Oh, I haven't heard those. I have to hear them.
Yeah, Dangerous Old Woman is one, and there's another one that I bought, like fairy tales and stuff. So I guess if you want to talk about Clarissa Pinkola Estes and how that.
Yeah, she has a myth in that book. It's all these myths of women in different cultures around the world, especially in the US, I think, that are stronger, that break societal conventions, that or hated because they did break societal conventions as a woman. And one of her stories is about the bone woman, La Huesera, La Loba. She has many different names, but she makes an appearance in my book. I read that story, had never heard about the bone woman, and thought, oh, this is beautiful. Like, this woman is so strong. She is taking the bones of wolves and they're transforming into women. And there's something, and that might be part of where the title comes from. I can't recall, but this idea of like somebody transforming and becoming something different. The bone woman also works with people that she takes an interest in to help them see their past and present and all timelines at the same time so that you can understand your life better. So yeah, Rocky meets her. She's the very first person that she meets on the road trip. And I had so much fun writing it. It's, funnily enough, when I wrote the first draft of HALF OUTLAW, it wasn't super magical realism the way it is now, but I had the bone woman in there. And I was like, this feels awkward. Like, it's just like dropped in. Like, I need to have her in there. She has to be there.
Yeah.
But it feels awkward. And eventually we were like, yeah, you need to, mirror her later on and add more magical realism elements. So it kind of all ties in. But it ended up working out.
I love that the story changed around her, because that's cool. That's a cool character. And I love that she came back. Yeah, it was really like a closure.
Yeah.
And Rocky like opening herself up to maybe some more magic in the world. Needed to do.
Yeah, we all do. I'm interested in writing a love story next, and you wrote a love story. So it was kind of cool. I've been like reading a lot of love stories. None of my books are very lovey. Yes, Rocky has a boyfriend, but
they don't love each other. Yeah.
They don't. Yeah, it's a weird kind of love, and then there's the ex-boyfriend, which awful love. But how was it for you, like, to write this love story to kind of help them grow as a couple over the course, John and Lo, over the course of the book, and then also Jason and Alexis? Like, we see them in love, and then something kind of shatters it. There's this unexpected pregnancy that kind of, gets them on rocky ground. And there's even like Blanche and how much she loves her husband who passed away. And then, Lo's father who loved her. So there's a lot of love stories going on. So can you talk about that? What was that process like?
Yeah, first of all, I love that you want to write a romance. I'm excited about that. Second of all, you will not believe at the beginning of this, I was like, she's getting back with Jackson. And then they started swings at each other. And I was like, no, I don't think so.
No.
Never mind, forget it. And so yeah, that's funny, because I was kind of like wondering, but then you posted something about, you're like, I didn't write a love story. And I was like, oh, then I realized that isn't
the motorcycle like club book is so like romance genre already. So I've been trying to like tell people like it's not like, don't pick it up thinking that's what it's going to be, because it's not loving at all.
Okay, I didn't realize that was part of that trope, but I like it. Yeah. So for me, I love stories. I mean, I will watch like Hallmark movies, and I don't like, it's not who I think of myself at. I like read literary fiction, love Rachel Kushner, whatever. I don't like, I don't know, I'll read anything really. So anyway, one of my first romances I ever read was my friend at NC State published one called Luck and Last Resort. So it's like a yacht romance. So not anything I would normally read, but loved it. And then I read Evie Dunmore wrote like a series of romances they're called like the League of Extraordinary Women. So it's like women who were on the forefront of European suffragettes and stuff like that. Okay. So I knew that I already knew it was a love story, because I thought they were going to be together trying to deal with their relationship problems. And so then I thought it was going to be a love triangle, which none of those ever panned out. But I think that I just I really enjoy that tension, that sexual tension in novels, in stories, and it's a big part. Big part of life, And I've been married, for like I've been together for almost 15 years, and so I think writing those early moments is fun, And then looking back, certainly with Blanche and Jerry, is also like an interesting exercise in thinking about what went wrong, or where or where we made mistakes, obviously in Jerry's case, or and so I don't know. I just like really, I think it's attention that I like, and that early budding romance. And but the book I'm writing now is like there's sex and there's but it's not going to leave people with the hopeful. I mean, there's
With like
yeah.
feelings, yeah.
So I don't know. What made you want to write the romance? What was it that inspired that idea?
My third book, it actually has a lot of sex, but no romance. And if anything, it shows like bad romance too. And, lately I've been thinking, I like to write about things that are bothering me, but also like, I want to call forth more love in my life. And I find it so interesting on how people behave toward each other who love each other.
Yes.
Like that concept is always interesting. And that's what I did with Half Outlaw. I was like, how can you love somebody but still hurt them and not even realize you're doing it sometimes? And when you do, you still do it. Like how does that work? So I'm always very interested in that. I fell in love with romance novels when I was in high school. I read them through my 20s, and then I've kind of stopped lately, but all these new modern romances, I'm like, these are fun. Like these give me good feelings and I'm not sad. Like I write sad stuff sometimes, or tortured. An agent called my characters deliciously tortured, which I was like, yeah, I enjoy it. I'll take that on. But I think there's something nice, a love story is a classic story. We've been writing about it. It can be literary fiction. And I want to task my hands at having something end up well between my characters. Yeah,
I love that. I saw like this was like an internet meme, that like went viral or whatever, but it made me, I shared it because it said something along the lines of like kind of like teasing or poking fun at the romance genre when women have happy endings, and so often in like literary fiction, it's like Madame Bovary or something like that, and also in the world, don't always get like that empowered happy ending. And so I'm like, yeah, write it. Yeah, do it.
I agree. You got a question here from Misha. I'm so fascinated by Blanche and her relationship with her son. Was this character inspired by a particular person?
She's in a league of her own. Blanche, my idol. Not really, obviously, but she made some choices there. But she was trapped by her true pain. And so I think that, no, I don't know anyone like Blanche. I think it was just her story. And I loved writing her, and people, like a lot of my friends in the MFA program when I was doing this book, loved her so much. And I thought that was like, it was good. I mean, it's good. It was easier to have sympathy for her in all the choices that she made and all the pain that she caused Jason because of her own pain. Like you said, like these adults make mistakes, and it's a lot of times because they just cannot process their own pain, and these unexpected things happen in life that can really just derail the whole thing, and so I just felt for her, but I didn't think and I don't want to spoil it for anyone, but I also didn't think, speaking of justice, necessarily like she got her wish either. I just didn't think that could happen. It just isn't the way the world worked out, and I think that felt right to me, though it was sad for her. Yeah,
I agree.
Go ahead, there's a question for you.
Are you gonna read it or mine?
No, I'll read it. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. Yeah, I just feel for Blanche, but so anyway, here's your question from Corey. Do you feel magical realism is evolving as a genre? Are we finding magic in new ways in the age of information?
That's a good question, Corey. I think magical realism is expanding. I always get this question because I teach magical realism classes. Yes, it was started by Latino authors. I am Latina. Can I write? If you are not Latino, can you write magical realism? Like, is it appropriate? Yeah, yes. The point of magical realism when these authors of Latin America started writing it was to criticize colonialism And that's all around the world, like colonialism, racism, all the things, capitalism that came from the bad parts of our history should be criticized. And people did it with magical realism to kind of give, what you said earlier, Misha, like some brevity to such hard discussions, to give you a different way of looking at them and connecting to them and seeing that we can break them apart kind of with magic. And I think with the age of information, we have these technologies. HALF OUTLAW is said in 1990, so the technologies are kind of limited, but I have enjoyed reading some magical realism in the way that people are playing with it in terms of dystopian future stories. I think I read a short story recently, and it was like these weird VR experiences that we might have and how magical realism can be integrated into that. The way, our phones are crazy sometimes, and they just have a life of their own, right? So yeah, I think I encourage anybody who's interested in magical realism to find ways to use it to talk about big discussions in the world, big issues, or just what's going on in their life. In terms of Rocky and magical realism, yes, it is part of her Latina heritage, but it's also a connection to her trauma. So a lot of times when she gets triggered, the magical realism might come up, or if it's an uncomfortable situation, she processes that situation through the magical realism.
I also kind of wondered if it showed that childlike part of her personality still hiding in there, like the motorcycles growling at her. Even when she's grown up, she thinks that way. And I always thought, oh, she's still connected to that playful part, but it's buried.
Yeah, it is. It is. And when you were talking about Blanche and Jason, I was kind of curious because I teach classes about writing different identities, and I always get people who are scared to do that. You clearly wrote characters who are different than your racial identity. I know we always write characters who are different than us and etc. But how was that for you? How was that process? There's even a part where Lo has a discussion with John, and she's in the auto shop, and she makes this says a biased statement about accents and assuming that the men in the shop who are Latino, English is their second language. That whole thing, and realizing, oh wait, maybe I'm wrong, maybe I'm judgmental. How was it to play with all those aspects and delve into that? Because I know it can be challenging or scary for writers.
It was scary, and it was scary for sure. And I didn't want to mess it up. I didn't want to but I'm also so I'm just going to write a book full of white people, and especially about Minnesota after everything that's happened there, so many bad things, and so I'm I'm not going to write a story about Minnesota full of white people doing white people things, because that's not real and it's not right. But I also, have nieces and nephews who are Black, and I was I'm not going to write and another reason I'm not going to write a story full of white people that they read my book one day and they're don't get to see themselves in any way. And so I, and not for, but also and all of that said, it's also just the story. Once you start writing, you're this is who they are. This is how the story plays out. And I think once you kind of can say that to yourself and be this is the world, this is the story. How do they feel? How would you, and you can practice empathy, and you can practice, but you can also do research and ask questions and follow, the reality of that, whatever is the story, reality of the identity. And so I think that I also the things that Lo said when she's, having these thoughts, and she's really sheltered. She's never really left her home except for literally once. And so she's having these thoughts that are because of that. She's a small town full of mostly white people, and she doesn't really use the internet, and she doesn't really stream shows, and so she's really very sheltered. And so I felt realistically she's going to be struggling with, whether it's not really struggling with maybe her own judgment, feeling ashamed of it. But so yeah, I definitely was someone said, an editor was just, you could make Jason white. And I'm I could, and I could have, but he wasn't. And I wanted to include all of those aspects of Black farming, which is really important to me. And actually Biden just backtracked on that bill that he was supposed to support for Black farmers. And so, and just this week. And so, yeah, I don't know, but I know that you talk a lot about writing the mixed identity, and that was really important to you. And as far as like, Trevor, was Black, right? And so she's like in a relationship in 1990, in LA, which was probably hopefully better than where she was from.
Yeah.
But yeah, what about you? How was that approach for you?
Yeah. I think I came into it just thinking, yeah, I write about diversity all the time as a journalist. I read about it. I'm from this interracial family. I'm mixed myself. I dated outside my race. All my friends are either mixed or different races. That it was going to be easy. And it's not to say like I wasn't creating these characters and it wasn't easy in some sense. Like I had done a lot of the homework. I was prepared to do it. But when I got to the editing part with Blackstone and I got my editor, I had come to that. I was at a point where I was like, okay, I have to comb through this. I teach these classes. I share how to do it. And since we've sold the book, I've learned so much, even within a year or 2 years. And so I combed through it so hard. I did so much research. I found, even things that people probably wouldn't have caught.
Yeah.
They wouldn't have noticed, but I found them. Like I broke down very small things. I looked at dialogue. I looked at tags. I looked at descriptions. I got so intense on it. So it was a good process. I have this new process now when I'm writing. I learned along the way. I hate this idea that just because you're a person of color or a person from a historical marginalized background, that you're just going to get it, like you'll know how to do it, which is not correct. I wrote, I have indigenous characters, I have Asian characters, I have Black characters, I have characters with disabilities and a gay character. So I really want to make sure I was respectful to all those communities, and it was cool. I feel very confident about it and very good about it. But I really enjoyed reading your book and seeing how you handled it. You seemed very confident in how you're approaching it, and Low made sense. Like it all made sense. So that was cool to see too.
Thanks. Yeah, and I I teach and I got my MFA as well, my MA, and so I love taking the classes, in like Black American Lit and like all kinds of like global lit, and I love magical realism, and Isabel Allende is one of my favorite writers, and I teach Gabriel Garcia Marquez is like kind of the figurehead. I might be a little bit off there. I know there's a few, but I teach.
Oh no, he was the international figurehead for sure. Yeah.
So I teach The Very Old Man with Enormous Wings every semester. Love that story.
Favorite short story.
I know. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and I loved your book, and I loved it was like all the stops. It reminded me of like the Odyssey, all the stops, meeting all these people and like having to face them and what they're going to learn, what they're going to put you through. So
I'm going to add that to my Amazon line, like the Odyssey.
Yeah.
By Misha Lazzara.
Like Odysseus. And now she just needs her Penelope some love. Yeah.
Agreed. Do we want to end off with like one last question?
Sure, good idea.
Okay. Let's see. Maybe a writing thing, or let me ask you, like, what's next for you? Like, that's a good question. Like, what's next for you in your writing career? Like, what are you excited about? What are you teaching? What are your events? Like, what's going on?
Yeah, that's a good one to end on. I have my Blackstone Book 2 deadline, September 31st. So it's a multi-generational kind of story about music. There's some outlaws in it. Yeah. And so not bikers, but they do go to prison.
Yeah.
It's a lot.
There's different types of outlaws.
Yeah. And so I'm excited about that. And I got to finish it, that's those deadlines. And I'm teaching the semester's senior level workshop, and I'm really excited about. So it's writing intensive, and then a 200 level, like a intro to fiction. Yeah. And so I got my Gabriel Garcia Marquez lined up. And what else do I teach? I can't remember what I teach with that magical realism, but there's one other story I can't remember. But anyway, so that's it. Yeah, I'm excited, and I'm excited for the semester to start, and I'm excited to finish my book too. Yes. And so you said something. So wait, you're already done with book 3?
Yeah, I've written a third book. I am working on. I have like a nonfiction proposal project, my first one. I'm pitched my agent another idea for 4th book yesterday.
When does
so we're talking about that. It's undetermined right now. So
okay. So it's done. The script is done.
Yeah, I have that other book done. It's undetermined on what's going on with it, but Yeah, I keep writing. I'm teaching some classes. I'm actually teaching a writing and identity other than your own class. It'll be mostly about writing race and ethnicity that's different than your own with Women's Fiction Writers Association. So that'll be in October, I believe. I'm teaching a shorter class with the Writers League of Texas on that very subject too. So doing a little bit of that and hopefully still celebrating Half Outlaw throughout the year.
Yeah, you got paperback coming out right next year and everything. So, well, cool. Congratulations. That's awesome. I was so happy to talk to you.
Me too. It was very cool to like see how our books connected. It was cool to connect with you. Congratulations on your your week, launch week. You have so many exciting events coming up, and I hope it's great for you and many successes.
It was such a great discussion, and it's so cool to watch you both in conversation. There's definitely so much crossover, and it was so cool to see how you just, explore the world of inclusive storytelling, forging your own path, and just finding personal power, not just through your literature, but through your own experiences. For those tuning in late, we are ending Blackstone Book Talks, The Open Road of Forging One's Identity. You can learn more about Alex Temblador and Misha Lazzara and their upcoming works by heading to our website at blackstonepublishing.com. And for the participants who signed up for our 2-book giveaway, please stay tuned to your email. We'll be sending out the grand winner announcement shortly after this event. Thank you guys so much again, and pick up Half Outlaw, pick up Man-Made Constellations, and I hope to see you all at the next round of Blackstone Book Talks.
Thanks for listening to Blackstone Book Talks with Blackstone Publishing. If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to help support the podcast, please share it with others, post about it on social media, or leave a rating and review. To catch all the latest bookish news from Blackstone, you can follow us on Instagram at Blackstone Publishing, on Twitter and Facebook at Blackstone Audio, or on our website at blackstonepublishing.com. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time.